This is episode 2 of Belly of the Kaiju podcast. So, last time I asked you to introduce yourself, you said you're a screenwriter and a screenwriting teacher. More interestingly, you said you are a reformed weeaboo and a blue collar screenwriter. Can you explain those terms?
Right. Yeah. So weeaboo, I think maybe, I don't know where I only learned that term quite recently. And so the term I used to use was Japanophile, and a more negative academic term is or not really an adjective, but a noun is Orientalism. Like I feel like I was a victim of Orientalism, and that I overcame that over time. And so what I mean is that I fetishize Japanese culture, et cetera, as many people do. But then the great thing about living here for as long as I've lived here is that I found I sort of became bored by Japan, and that's in a good sense, in that I am no longer excited by things, but I'm bored in the sense of like that you're bored by your home, like it's something comfortable and good, and so it's not a bad thing, but it's and it means that you don't see it as strange, and also I see all the diversity here now, like where I obviously like anybody outside Japan, you'll see a certain image in media, but then once you're here, you see all different kinds of people and all different kinds of subcultures and whatever, and that they're not one thing, or Japanese people are not one thing, and cultures are not one thing. And then on the second point about the blue collar writer, what I mean by that is, as I was saying last time, I watched this video from a guy called Scriptfella, Dominic Morgan, I think is his name, and he had these different categories of kind of writer incomes, and I forget the terminology that he used, but the way it stuck in my memory at least was something akin to blue collar, meaning that there are working writers like myself who, like right now, I'm not teaching, I'm just writing, and so making a living writing. But it's a small living and very humble existence. But smaller projects, etc. So I make it work, and so of course, like anybody, there are always the dreams of greater things or something. But honestly, the way I see things, like I just try to live in the moment and just be happy with the particular project I'm working on right now, and as much as possible try to get that to consume myself and just live the day to day. And this is a cheesy reference, but I absolutely love the movie Titanic, or I used to, at least. I don't love it so much now, but I watched it like 15 times in the cinema when it came out, that like 97 or something. And the line from that, it's such a cliche, is to live each day to its fullest, or something like that. And the point being that I literally think that now, like where I always assume I'm going to die tomorrow, and just try to make the best out of today, and not, I don't have a lot of plans. Like I just of course I like plan, but what I'm trying to say is that I don't try to be happy later. I'm just kind of really quite satisfied with where I am right now. So.
That's difficult for most people, right? How did you get there? Is that just through studying some philosophy or religion, or
maybe a bit of that? And also there's a question of how real it is, right? Like I can say it, is it really real? Even if I believe that it's real, is it really real, etc. But so I guess the biggest thing I'd say is just age. Is that as you get older, then maybe you rationalize things, and you have to deal with your own mortality, etc. So I'm 44 now, and so what's the point? Oh, and then also like learning more about the business and how things work. I'm less sort of starstruck than I once was, and so I just sort of see the industry warts and all, and so I know that if something works out for me, or if it doesn't work out for me, it's no big thing either way. A good example of what I'm talking about is I forget the name of this actor, but he was in the movie Pearl Harbor, the Michael Bay film, and he was really big in those days. He was in Black Hawk Down. Could you help me out? You know the guy who was like a really good looking guy at that time. Anyway, it'll come to me. But that actor, he was interviewed one time on some late night show, And he was really hot at that time, and now I can't even remember his name, but he was like the biggest thing. Josh Hartnett.
Josh Hartnett.
Yeah.
I was
And
just
so
Googling it.
yeah. And so he was this really down to earth guy. And in this interview, he was talking about how he got this advice from his father, and it really rings true to me now. I didn't really get it at the time that I saw it, I guess, but which was that you shouldn't take what other people say about you seriously. And that's always kind of a cliche, meaning like don't be hurt if people say bad things. But what the father's wisdom was kind of had this flip side, which is also when they say good things about you, don't believe that either. And so that everything's just a lot of hype. And so I think, yeah, anyway, I try to think in those terms.
Cool. You do a lot of writing for, I don't know if you do a lot of writing for the English language film school in Tokyo. Yes. So that's why you teach there and you make a living there, right?
Well, yeah. So I was teaching at the ELFS. When was that? That would have been like 3 years ago or so.
Okay.
And on and off 3 to 4 years ago. And then since then started up a small company with my wife, just the two of us, and doing the same kind of content, adjusted a little bit. And right now online because of the pandemic. But again, right now, literally, I'm not teaching at all, but I keep the small company going with my wife just because
and that's teaching, is it?
Time into it. It's teaching, yeah. It's teaching / consulting.
Oh,
so
great.
I've had like students. It's designed for Japanese people, or it's geared toward Japanese people, and we might end up doing a class in Tokyo in person, COVID allowing, but which would be great for me. But I've also had like an Australian student, and I worked with one American company, like basically doing a kind of private lesson for some executives and stuff. And
what do you teach exactly? Writing?
Yeah, so it's screenwriting theory,
okay.
But trying to boil it down to really fundamental things that are not so specific to film, but are more about storytelling, and then applying that to any kind of field, like the theory being that it would work for a novel or even a marketing thing or something like that, for advertising, for instance.
Okay, well, that ties in nicely to one of the things I wanted to talk about. I hear that Asian students often have difficulties writing in a kind of Western 3-act structure, like in an argumental style. They're used to something called Kishotenketsu, which we've talked about a lot, a kind of 4-act structure. Have you found that in your own students, that they naturally try to speak in a different structural way?
Yeah, right. Again, maybe this is my bias, and as you said, we've debated this before, but my personal bias is that I tend to see humans as all the same, and I tend to see cultural differences as exaggerated. And for instance, like I was asked by somebody in Australia, but despite my accent, I'm from Australia, and I was asked by a relative, like, what are Japanese people like? And the question literally didn't mean anything to me, or it didn't make sense to me, because like, how do you encapsulate 120 million different people in one, and
well, that's like saying what are 6-foot people like,
exactly.
It's not exactly like that, but as you say, like,
exactly.
people are more the same than they are different, right?
Right. Yeah. And so I maybe I take it too far, and I acknowledge that sometimes, like that, for instance, it is true that in general, maybe not maybe, it is true that Japanese people, if you check the statistics, I'm sure, wear their shoes indoor far less than say Americans or something, or wear masks in terms of COVID and stuff. But I would argue that those things, to the degree that they're true, are not some innately magical Japanese thing, but there are historical factors that
it's cultural norms, right?
Yeah, and that they can change on a dime, like that. That's the point. So I'm looking more for the universality of human experience that isn't just for this current century in Japan, or this current half century in Japan, but goes right back, to perhaps human prehistory, et cetera, and dare I say, could even be genetic, meaning genetic in a human sense, not a racial sense.
Yeah. I was reading a little bit of what's it called, The Science of Storytelling,
Exactly right. We're going to talk about yeah, yeah,
and this author seems to. I was just reading a few chapters today.
yeah.
Seems to he makes quite a big deal out of the difference between Eastern and Western
That's
stories.
right. I thought that was really interesting. Yeah, because in general, his thesis is about some kind of universal human thing.
Yeah.
And then after making this whole argument, he says, "Oh, but by the way, Asians are different." And it's like half a chapter on that. Like, yeah,
Yeah. I want to read
yeah,
you a little quote. So
yeah,
he says
please.
Greek myths with three acts. Sorry, he
Hmm.
describes Greek myths
Yeah.
with three acts as
Mm.
individualist propaganda,
Right.
transmitting the notion that one courageous person really could change everything.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there's an argument to be made there. Like, for instance, Game of Thrones
Mhm.
made sociological storytelling very popular, otherwise known as Marxist storytelling, and that's a kind of
Yeah.
competing school of thought to the hero's journey thing, and that many, I don't know enough about Game of Thrones. I'm not such a big fan myself, but what I've heard is that many fans who didn't like the last season, one theory for why they didn't like the last season is that they ran out of books and that
Yeah.
they were drifting from the source material, and so then the source material was sociological slash Marxist, and
Yeah.
the third, well, not third, sorry, whatever season it was, the final season
Yeah.
was written in a more traditional hero's journey type thing, and so in that case, you've got both things being Western, but just two different points of view. And the characteristic of the sociological storytelling is that it's about groups and great forces in history, as opposed to the individual foibles of leaders who decide everything by themselves.
I guess The Wire is another example of that.
Exactly.
And
That's right. That's right.
I
Yeah.
know the guys who wrote that like cite Dickens, like they wanted to make like a
Okay. Right.
Dickensian kind of
Exactly. Right.
story, which
Social. Yeah.
apparently
Yeah.
is
Social
like I haven't
commentary.
read
Yeah.
any Dickens, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no, I loved it. I used to teach a class on literature, on politics in literature, and I used some Dickens in that. And yeah, I think that's a really good reference. Yes.
So you said Marxist storytelling.
Yeah. So what I mean by that is just
Hmm.
the like one like so, and I guess technically I perhaps should use the term Marxian, because there
Hmm.
in politics there are these two terms, Marxist and Marxian, and
Okay.
Marxist implies some kind of prescriptive
Hmm.
sort of value-based judgment on good and bad, et cetera, of society. And
Yeah.
that's the typical image of Marx. But the other side of that is the Marxian economics, which is regardless of what is good or bad, regardless of
Yeah.
where one chooses to place one's morals, it's just a factual question of like what's actually going on. How does history work? How does society work? And so a lot of capitalist economists
Hmm.
prescribe or subscribe to Marxian economics. And so their idea is that they don't agree with maybe Marx's prescriptions for how society
Yeah.
should be, but they agree that, yeah, this is kind of how it is, that individuals don't have quite as much say as it appears, and that a lot of,
Yeah.
like you're saying, Western literature centers the individual as the agent of change in history, and that's different from Marxist materialism, which comes from like Hegel and stuff, which is that history is these grand forces, and
Hmm.
that individuals have little to no say in what happens. And the example comes from Tolstoy, another Western reference, not an Asian one, but Russian to be sure. And Tolstoy said that Napoleon, so the French think Napoleon was really good, or French history textbooks. I shouldn't say French people, I can't speak for them, but French history textbooks speak of Napoleon often as good and powerful. English history textbooks speak of Napoleon as bad and powerful, but they both agree that he was powerful. Whereas Tolstoy argued that he wasn't powerful at all, that actually he was at the acting the whim or the in response to the forces on either side of him. That if he drifted too far in one direction, the generals would say go back that way. Drift too far the other way, the other generals would say go back that way. And so his opportunities for decision making are quite narrow, and so that kind of lends to the idea that I don't know, the standard 3 act structure that says that Luke Skywalker is going to save the day by himself. It is perhaps not so realistic in a sense of how history actually works or how things develop. And that's one argument for why Game of Thrones was why the fans who are addicted to that kind of storytelling that was looking at social forces were unhappy with the switch to a more kind of personality-based storytelling at the end.
Well, I'll give you my take on
Please,
Game of Thrones, because I love the first 4 seasons, and then I think it kind of went
and I don't know anything
slowly
about
downhill
it, so
from there.
Yeah, so
It's a great show. It's really interesting, and it's. I think George R.R. Martin kind of wrote it as a response to Tolkien. He wanted to make a Tolkien-esque story with in a world that isn't black and white. I think he said he wants to write characters that have a human heart. So he wanted to write, more realistic characters. And it's famous for killing off characters that you assume are going to be protagonists or heroes.
Right. Yeah.
And it's kind of the way I think the way it's written up until they ran out of source material is it's something we talked about in our last interview, but like characters react to things realistically,
right?
And there isn't any artificial tension created. There's no
right.
So in the last episode, I think there's like there's shots where it's like it becomes so Hollywood, and you'll have like a shot of a character about to be killed, and then like it cuts away to something else, and then like it cuts back to them, and like they're in a situation which they're obviously not going to survive,
right?
And then like they're fine. Whereas in the first few seasons, they will kill characters unexpectedly just to kind of make a point, and then it's the last season. It's like plot armor. I'm talking about plot armor, I guess. There's so much of that in the last, just kind of lazy writing, and they knew how the story was going to end in the books, but they had to try and make their own way there. So they kind of cobbled it all together, and that's I think it became more of a Hollywood movie style,
right? Yeah.
And I think what was so great about the show was that it had this feeling that anything could happen,
right?
But also, great dialogue, great characters, great stories. Like so like people have like 3 or 4 favorite characters in that show. Like,
exactly. Yeah.
It's so well written. Yeah.
And I don't pretend to be of that caliber myself, but what I'm trying to say is, or what I'm about to say is that when I'm writing a feature, I approach it quite differently to if I'm writing a series. And I think that comes from the medium and the economics in the medium. So meaning that in a series you need the thing to go on forever, ideally, and in a feature there's a finite amount of time, and so then perhaps there's more of a temptation to hit certain marks in a feature than there is in a series where you just establish a character and then just follow that character logically. How things come what may, you just accept whatever pattern emerges as you develop it without too much of a plan in advance. And then it perhaps becomes more natural.
I think movies have a big advantage there. TV series, unless they're like episodic, like Mystery of the Week, like X-Files or Star Trek, The Next Generation, the early Star Trek shows, something like that. If it just goes on and on, like The Walking Dead, for example, you kind of get the feeling that there isn't a story. It's just this happens and this happens. It becomes kind of a soap opera. And
yes.
I don't know, I don't really like that kind of thing. I like a TV show when it's like, it's going to end. Right.
But so then that brings us back to maybe the original question, your great question, and I don't mean to dodge it, which is, so is there something fundamentally different about Japanese storytelling or Asian storytelling, et cetera? And but so I'll throw the question back at you and ask, with these series that you love, and I know you do so much work on anime and know so much about it, do you feel that, like, if you take a Western series that you like, not one that you don't like, but a Western series that you like and a Japanese series that you like, are the two things that you like fundamentally different, or are there commonalities?
I think definitely. I don't think I'm an expert on anime at all, and I think I just have some good insights about it because coming from a screenwriting background and enjoying it, it's like I think not that many people talk about screenwriting in anime, so it's something I enjoy doing. But like, I think I don't know, like TV shows that I like and Japanese animated series that I like. I think it's just good writing.
Yeah,
they have in common, and like they don't have like everything is motivated,
right?
Characters don't do things just for plot purposes,
right?
I think one of the great things about anime is that it's usually based on a manga.
Yes.
Or it has some original source material, so it's already been like through a filter, right? So shit manga isn't going to get made into an anime, so it's already been through one filter.
Yes.
It's also usually written by one person.
Yep.
So it has more of a voice, more of a I don't know. It doesn't have this committee style writing.
Yes, interesting.
Sometimes it's too long, but a lot of really great animes, like short, they'll only have a couple of seasons or one season, something like that. Sorry.
Yeah, well, and then maybe a corollary to that would be that's the word is so I'm so old school that I am stuck in like the 90s in terms of my anime references, with which film I love, the cliche Akira. And to me, Akira is such a like standard Hollywood film, but it just happens to be a Japanese animated film. Or I love Kurosawa films, and to me, they're just pretty standard Hollywood films, but they just happen to be Jidaigeki samurai films. And so my question is, the patterns that you like in recent anime, do you think are recent anime different from older anime? Or do you see like a change over time, or is there something more fundamental connected?
Well, firstly, I just want to add something to my last point.
Please, I'm sorry.
And I think it's the commonality is probably respect for your audience.
Yeah.
So a lot of the time where Hollywood fails, it's where they don't respect the audience, where they put too much fan service or over explain things, or just assume that an audience will go along with bad writing just for spectacle or something like that. So I think even in modern Japanese animation, even like with stuff aimed at teenagers, like shonen stuff, like I don't know, like One Piece, you might be familiar with. Or
I mean, I don't know enough. I know of it, but I don't know enough.
I haven't really watched it, but like those kind of shows, they still have a respect for their audience. They don't really talk down to the audience. I think that's a huge thing for me. I'm
sorry.
Sorry, what was your second?
What was the question? No, that's it. Oh, would my other question, but you don't have to answer. Like I'm going off on tangents left, right, and center, but it was about like whether things change over time. Whether
I think the reference points that you have of movie animation.
Right. I see.
And Akira is is very has a very Hollywood production style. I think it's very lush. It's I think it's animated at a very high frame rate. I think it's 24 frames per second, as opposed to.
There's a controversy about that, but yeah.
Oh, really? What's the controversy?
Well, I don't know enough about it, but I just like happened to see little YouTube videos that were like arguing like it is 24. No, it's not, and blah blah blah. But anyway,
okay, well, it's a higher frame rate.
Whatever it was very high quality. Yeah.
A lot of anime is, I think they use combinations of frame rates. So sometimes they'll use higher ones, but usually it's 8 frames a second, I think.
Yeah. Well, I showed my son recently Ghost in the Shell, and he
well, that's another one that's
exactly and he's Japanese, like his first language is Japanese, and he's like 16 years old, growing up in the 21st century, And my thesis was, hypothesis was that this was higher quality than recent anime, meaning just in technical terms, in terms of like maybe frame rate or something.
I think it's a different focus.
Yeah, right.
I think those kind of movies are they're more filmic, if that makes sense. They're a little bit, I don't know if they're a different kind of depth of field, or the cinematography is more realistic, or I don't know. It just feels more filmic in a way. Whereas, like, I'm trying to think of modern animation. Someone like Makoto Shinkai, who did Your Name and Weathering with You.
Okay. Yes. Right. Okay. Those are quite high quality, right? They're very They're
gorgeous, and like the backgrounds are beautiful, and like he's known for just really, really beautiful movies, and I just think it's a different style. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know why those kind of 90s anime movies look so different, to be honest.
And so then that brings us back to the question of the science of storytelling, and the question of like whether there's something identifiably Eastern that can, and I'm kind of arguing that these things, there are little trends that go even within Japan, and that over time things drift in different directions, and depending on whether it's a series or a feature, and depending on the budget, you get a different style and stuff.
Well, I think depends on the audience. Like if you look at Ghibli movies, and I want to read another quote from that book.
Yeah.
Sorry, give me a sec.
Please.
Give me a sec.
Oh, yeah.
What did he say? Greek myths usually have 3 acts: Aristotle's beginning, middle, and end, perhaps more usefully described as crisis, struggle, resolution. They often start singular heroes battling terrible monsters and returning home with treasures. This was individualist propaganda. Oh, I already read that one. Transmitting the notion that one courageous person really could change everything.
Right.
And he also said, whereas Westerners enjoy having accounts of individual struggle and victory beamed into their neural realms, Easterners take pleasure from the narrative pursuit of harmony. What these forms reflect is the different ways our cultures understand change. For Westerners, reality is made up of individual pieces and parts. When threatening unexpected change strikes, we tend to reimpose control by going to war with those pieces and parts and trying to tame them. For Easterners, reality is a field of interconnected forces. When threatening unexpected change strikes, they're more likely to reimpose control by attempting to understand how to bring those turbulent forces back into harmony so that they can all exist together. What they have in common is the story's deepest purpose. They are lessons in control. And he said something about endings as well in the Eastern stories. The endings are more open-ended, and the joy in the audience is for deciding what the ending might be like. And I think Ghibli movies are a good example of that.
Right.
And I think a lot of Japanese stories do have an open-ended quality. I know last time we talked about Murakami Haruki and his novels. What I love about them is they do have this ambiguity, but they also often have a heroic structure to them as well, and a main character and a journey, and like especially Kafka on the Shore is I love that book so much. It's a fantastic example of a kind of combination of a hero's journey, but with some ambiguity to it that doesn't make it makes it feel more real. And I think like something like Your Name does that as well. It's maybe not, that was a little bit over the top with the
so here's my argument is that first of all, I really love that book, The Science of Storytelling, and so I don't mean to attack it. Like I learned so much from it, and I respect the guy so much.
I'm gonna go through it properly. It seems like a great book.
And but so my argument just on this specific question of like whether there's this fundamental East-West divide, I am very skeptical of it for I'm a big fan of history, and I'm conscious of how Japan has changed so much over history. And so, for instance, in Australian media in the late 19th century or early 20th century, the stereotype of Japanese people was that they were very lazy. And so my point is that the things that get thought of as national characteristics change over time, depending on politics, economics, etc. And then people say, oh, that's something innate about this people or something. When and I think it's easier to say that about something that you know less about, and not you know so much about Japan. But what I'm saying is that for people outside Japan, it's easy to say, oh, Japanese people are like this. But then if you ask them about their own country, they have a little bit of a harder time talking about their own country because they're aware of all the diversity within their own country, more aware of it than within the other. And so, but without getting too historical and political, I'm just saying that's the kind of bias that I'm coming at in terms of my analysis of like just facts of like what's actually going on here in human psychology. But again, I admit that I can't prove it, and that this stuff is sort of like all the evidence isn't in yet and stuff. So then that's why I really enjoyed that book, The Science of Storytelling. And another book I read, written by a professor from my old film school, had a similar stuff. But in the case of both books, I felt like one problem was that they lacked a kind of unifying theory of everything, for lack of a better term, meaning that there were little snippets of
books like
research. Exactly, yeah. And to their credit, they're not faking it, you know, like they're saying like we don't have enough data to actually have.
I know what you mean. Some some storytelling books do try to have a unifying theory. Sorry, go on.
No, and so what I'm trying to say simply is that we can look. It's like Adam Smith. I used to teach a class about Adam Smith, and so Adam Smith, you know, you can take stuff from Adam Smith to mean one thing, and then take stuff from him to mean the opposite thing. It's kind of like the Bible. And depending on where your bias lies, not yours, but where one's bias lies, then you cherry pick the evidence, and then you end up at this conclusion based on quotations from Adam Smith or the Bible or whatever. And so likewise, now I'm going to cherry pick from The Science of Storytelling and say, there's another part of that book where he talks about this, stuck in my head. It's a while since I read it. But he talks about how there was research into, I want to say like New York Times bestsellers or something, and they got all the data, did it, you know, scientifically, and about you know, what was the pattern, and analyzed it, I don't know, with an AI or something. And what that research indicated was that there were 5 acts in these bestsellers, and what I would argue is that those 5 acts can be reinterpreted as 3 or reinterpreted as 4, depending on one's disposition in terms of how you categorize things. Like I have a friend who's a philosopher of the history and philosophy of science, and I really I pick his brain a lot for my own writing about science fiction and stuff. And what he was telling me when I was working on my theory for these classes that we teach was that whenever you categorize stuff, science appears to be objective, but it's not actually objective. For instance, like if you're doing COVID testing, or if you're doing any kind of testing, like for lead or something, as a tester, a scientist, you have to make a conscious decision. Do you want to err on the side of catching every case, or do you want to err on the side of too many mistakes or too many misses or something, meaning false positives, false negatives? I can't even say it the way he says it, but maybe you get what I'm saying. And so my point being that you have to make a judgment call about what's your purpose. Like, why are you doing this test? Are you doing it to protect people, which is a political decision, a moral decision, or are you doing it to protect the companies and help the companies sell more products? And if you want to help the company sell more products, then you're going to want to not be too strict in how closely you look for lead. But if you want to, because sometimes you'll appear to find lead even if there isn't lead there, et cetera. So you'll be unfair to the companies in that case. So anyway, you have to make a moral choice every time, even as a scientist, ostensibly objective scientist. So likewise, I'm saying that in terms of categorizing a story, a system of storytelling, you can choose to go for a pattern of 3, or choose to go for a pattern of 5, or choose to go for a pattern of 4, and the same set of data will actually fit those 3 different theories. And it just depends on what your purpose is. Like, what's your end goal? What are you trying to get to? And I would argue that most screenwriting books, what their end goal is trying to get at a template that is easy to learn and easy to teach, etc.
Yeah.
And an example of this that I got from, so a long story, but example of this I got from my friend, history and philosophy of science guy, is that the periodic table is not actual reality, meaning that if you look more closely at each of those elements, there's so much more detail going on. And so the periodic table is a really, really rough abstraction. And so you could do it at that scale or this scale or this scale. And whichever scale you choose is based on what's your purpose and how much data are you able to process at one time. And so likewise, I would say that myself, I see those 5 points within the 3-act structure. And I also see the 4 points of the Japanese thing within the 3-act structure. And so to me, it's all the same thing.
No, I agree, absolutely. Yeah. There's so many different I can't remember if it's John York's book. I can't remember. There's one that said there's like 22 acts in the screenplay,
Right.
and then the Hero's Journey, I think there's 12 beats in that.
Right.
I do think in one of your articles you talk about the promise of the premise in Save the Cat, Fun and Games, right?
Yes, yeah.
I don't know what my point is exactly.
Yeah, no. That's really interesting. Yeah. Well, I think that's an interesting case in terms of what I'm talking about, because I don't include the promise of the premise in my own classes. And the reason I don't is because I don't feel that it's 100% necessary, meaning that it's a tool and that it's very useful and it can work in certain cases, but I don't think it applies to every case. And so when what I talk about, like the theory of everything, is like trying to find out what are the things that are present in every story, as opposed to what are the things that can be present. And I think that's one of them that can be present, but doesn't necessarily have to.
I think if we talk about things that are in every story, and I said this last time, but I think every story, the basic, the fundamental purpose is change,
right,
in the audience. So in certain types of story, especially stories aimed at teenagers or mythological stories, hero's journey stories, we have a main character and we kind of we go through a change, we go through a journey via proxy, and we empathize with that character. I think in a lot of stories which use Kishotenketsu, which we talked about last time, which is a structure that comes from Asia, and it uses 4 acts. The first 2 acts are kind of introduction and development. The third act is a twist where it provides new information. And then in the 4th act, it kind of tries to tie everything together.
Right.
And in that kind of story, as in detective stories, I think it's the audience that goes through a change where you have this idea about what the story is, and then you get some new information at the end, which kind of recontextualizes everything. And instead of relating to the main character and going through this journey with them, you're kind of, your own assumptions and your own ideas are being challenged throughout the stories.
Right.
But I don't think it's a fundamentally Eastern thing, because it does happen in like detective stories and different kinds of stories. I mean, you talked about like people assume that different cultures have different stories, and I think maybe it's some confirmation bias there.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing. Because, so those stories are there, but it's a question, like both kinds of stories are there, and which ones do you choose to focus on? Yeah.
Well, I think like a lot of people say anime is more grown up than than Western animation, and I think that's true. But I think that I don't think that the Japanese mind is, more advanced and can handle is able to appreciate the beauty of cartoons, because like Western people also enjoy an anime. It's just that we don't make animations for older audiences, apart from explicitly older audiences like South Park or Family Guy or something like that.
And that gets back to that idea of Marxian analysis or materialist analysis, meaning not the political side, not judgment calls, but just about factual questions of like, how does stuff actually work? I would argue that a lot of the things that are conventions in Hollywood are the product of economics that, or like I learned recently about how the length of book chapters that has remained very much the same for a century or a couple of centuries or so was dictated by how long people could sort of focus and sit down at one time before needing to get up and use the toilet or something like that, or that the length of a feature film is traditionally dictated by humans' bladders, and that you need an intermission in the middle and things like that. And so that or that a TV series, in order to have more seasons, will need a certain kind of storytelling in order to make more money. Or a feature film will need to be tighter and shorter, not because Aristotle says that you should have things tight and short, but because if you're making Men in Black, it's like 90 something minutes. And if you're making Titanic, it's like 180 minutes or something. And so then the cinema in those old days could only screen Titanic a few times a day, whereas they can screen Men in Black umpteen times and make so much more money. And so it's a safer bet to go for the shorter film, and it's a safer bet to go for the longer TV series. And it's not saying
that's kind of changed recently, though.
Right,
with
exactly.
I guess Marvel movies are so long, but they make so much money,
right.
and I guess there's less risk in high budget movies. The thing I love about I think what's great about Netflix, if you look at something like Squid Games, it's not restricted at all by the necessity for ad breaks or certain length of episodes. And I think there's a lot of shows like that coming out now that are they can be more novelistic in their approach. They can, the story can be however long they want it to be, or it's basically like a movie, but not restricted by movie. And I think that's great. I think there is a sweet spot. I think 22 episodes of 45 minutes is too much. If you look at like we were talking about, I mentioned Star Trek earlier, but like I think with shows like that, like every other episode is great, and then every other episode is not it's fine, but it's just like something like Game of Thrones, where it's like 10 episodes, 1 hour each. I think that's like a perfect. I don't know. I like economic writing. So
I'm with you. Well,
I think movies are one of the best. I've been thinking recently, I want to make a video about like the best storytelling medium. And I think probably number one, just be novels, books, because it's you can cheat so much. You can have exposition, you can have audiences say anything, you can have the writer just say their thoughts and explain anything at any time. It can be as long or as short as you want, and also you can just pick it up and read anytime. You don't have to sit down. There's no technological restrictions. And then after that, I don't know, I'd probably put movies. I don't know, just because the writing is so economic. Or what do you think is the best storytelling medium?
Yeah, it's a great question. Like, again, now I'll, this is going to sound again like I'm dodging the question, but it's a sincere thing, which is I have these fundamental philosophical questions about all of these questions, all these elements, like, for instance, words like best and good. There's that whole subjectivity issue, right? Which is like when we talk about good writing or bad writing, what do we actually mean? And when we talk about a good medium, and so my general bias is I am a big believer in to each their own and subjectivity. And that comes from Kant, the idea that there is no such thing as good art. And so the only way that you could possibly assign the label good to art would be if it fulfilled its purpose. And first you have to identify its purpose in order to measure whether or not it achieved its purpose. And even just identifying the purpose is difficult enough. But
even it can be something can be entertaining without fulfilling its purpose. Like what's that movie, The Room, right?
Okay, exactly. There you go.
Yeah.
But I think this is a bit pedantic, and I do get where you're coming from. And so I guess my answer would be, who's the market, who's the audience, and that's how a producer thinks.
It depends on the story as well, right?
Yeah, well, meaning that like if you're trying to find something that's good for people of a certain demographic, etc., then a certain medium is going to be good for them. Or if you're thinking But often what happens is the medium that dominates is not necessarily the one that the consumer would choose first, but it's the one that's being marketed to them because it's most profitable from the company's point of view. And so it's always really hard to parse these things out, meaning that it's not necessarily meritocracy. And so that the things that dominate are the things that have the best marketing, and where you're telling the market you should want this, even if perhaps they don't naturally decide to want it by themselves. An example of that is, I remember ages ago, I was working for this producer, and he took us all to see the Godzilla movie. This is around the time of Titanic. I was like an intern, and he's this big producer, and his point was, look at this. This is a movie that's going to make its money back. And nobody really enjoyed it, but it's got really good marketing. so the point is that, like, just because a movie has high ticket sales, you can't measure that as some indication of quality or something.
Yeah, I find it really surprising that people talk about, like, studios responding to their own movies. Like, if it sells a lot of tickets, then that means it's a good movie. Like, I don't think that's true at all. That just means it had good marketing, right? It just had a good trailer.
Well, and it could be. So this is my point. Is maybe it is. Maybe there are word of mouth sleepers as well. And just I'm saying
word
that
of mouth
to be scientific and to distinguish between the two is so difficult. Meaning, like, advertisers, marketers always try to analyze markets and try to work out why did somebody buy something, and it's very, very difficult to get inside their head and work out why the consumer is doing X, Y, or Z, and would they have done that? So.
Sorry, you were breaking.
Oh, I'm sorry, it broke up. Yeah, so I'm saying that, yes, like you're saying, that it's difficult. It's always difficult to parse out how much is due to the marketing, how much is due to some quality of the story, et cetera. And so another example of what I'm talking about is in terms of your question of, like, which medium is good, is I was fascinated by something I saw in an interview with Scorsese, where he was talking about how I want to say, like, Plato or somebody was against books because it was this newfangled technology that was coming in and was dumbing people down, and that smart people in those days talked, and that the dialectic and the back and forth is the way to go about thinking about things like we're doing now. And if you just read something and take it on faith from a text, there's a tendency to switch off your brain and just be indoctrinated. Whereas if you have to, this was, I think, Plato's argument. And so my point simply being that the things that we respect today, like Shakespeare or whatever, were thought of differently in their own time. And so now I read this article recently about how young people today are watching TV series like on Netflix or something, when they're maybe going to bring in a 2x speed thing for people with no time. They're going to watch TV series like with the
I think they've brought in
right
1.5. I think you can watch.
That's okay. It's already there. And so my point is, like,
Scorsese was mad about that as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's sacrilege. It's whatever. But my point is, when I step back and objective enough, I can imagine, like, 100 years from now, people will see that as high art or something. Like, there'll be a way of doing it in a good way or something. Yeah.
I don't know. I think if you're watching a TV series at 1.5, you shouldn't be watching it. Like, it's
right.
It's not entertaining in itself. You just kind of hooked on the story. I remember I live with a guy. He was watching The Walking Dead on his laptop, and he would just scroll through the bar at the bottom to like action scenes or zombie scenes. Like, he didn't want to see, like, the boring talking parts. And I think, like, if it's a better show, then he would be interested in those things. But
well, I mean, so okay, so what I can tell you then, to not be evasive and just be totally honest about my personal taste, is I'm an old-fashioned sort of feature film type person. I mean, I one thing is, I'm busy. Everybody's busy, but I in terms of even just watching stuff, it's hard for me to find the time to watch anything. And so unless I have to watch it for work, and so then I will watch feature films because there's an end. like if I start watching Game of Thrones, it never ends. It's another 50 hours. So, and so that's a motivating
huge
factor
advantage.
for me.
I think so. Okay, let me see what questions I have. You said you don't. Do you think there's such a thing as good or bad art?
Yeah. So what I'm arguing, Kant's argument is there's not, but with the caveat of saying that it's possible to use the word good or bad. And I don't dispute the way that you're using it yourself, but I would just say that if we think about it a bit more deeply, we're measuring whether or not it is achieving certain goals, and we just have to identify those goals, and then we can check, etc. And so
Yeah,
I would
I think
argue that
that's
it's just a
fair.
question, yeah, just a question of like, does it connect with its intended audience? And so that if you make a film, I was saying this to somebody the other day, that if you make a film that costs like $300 million, then you're going to want to reach everyone in the world to make your money
Yeah.
back. But if you make a film that only costs like a couple of $100,000 or something, even if there's only this small subculture of people who really love it, that's a success because
Yeah.
they're your market,
Yeah.
you know. And so the point is that different strokes for different folks. What I'd argue is that the way Kant thinks as a philosopher is the way really hard-nosed producers that I've worked with think, meaning that they're not so not thinking in such a artistic sense. They're just thinking in terms of money, like, you know, how do we make money? And so we need to identify the market and satisfy that market. And so then it's kind of it's almost like empiricism, where you're testing the theory of like what is good art by seeing, can you get these people to watch your movie, this certain demographic.
Yeah. I think if your criteria is just getting people to pay to watch the movie,
yes,
that's not going to make good art. Because I think that's what's wrong with a lot of Hollywood movies nowadays, is they make a great trailer, and then the film is they're trying to write to please an audience.
You're so right. No,
to give the audience what they want to see, instead of like making a good story.
No, you're so right. So what I should say is that okay, like let's take a good example is maybe Casablanca, which is people have enjoyed over years. It's not the most artistic film, meaning it's not too highbrow. It's pretty standard stuff, but it works for a certain kind of moviegoer, and it stood the test of time, and that people can go back to it, etc. And it's difficult to parse out again. Maybe they're going back to it out of nostalgia, or because people tell them that it's good, and it's hard to distinguish between different factors. But anyway, the point is that it's not a flash in the pan. That obviously there's something there, whatever it is, that is stood the test of time. And so what I'm arguing is, okay, let's call that quote unquote good. But what we mean is it's good for the people who like that, meaning there's a whole other demographic of moviegoers who don't like that. And so I'm arguing that the ones who like it are not right, and the ones who hate it are not wrong. It's just different strokes for different folks. There are different markets that you're trying to, that the market for a Tolstoy novel is different from the market for a Michael Bay film. And that people who watch Michael Bay films are not bad people, and people who love Tolstoy, as I love Tolstoy, are not good people. That it's just different kinds of people.
So do you think there is no such thing as good taste?
I would argue that what people don't say, like sort of the secret that a lot of people don't say when they say that, and not you, but what people say when they say good taste, is what they mean is like upper class people, like educated people and stuff, and that they're looking down on the masses. And I so I personally don't like Michael Bay films, but I respect Michael Bay. Like, I think he really knows his stuff, and I can't do it, you know. And so my point being that a lot of the time people will write off some commercial thing and say, oh, it's trash, but it takes a lot of effort and skill and talent to make that kind of quote unquote trash, meaning that the things that people look down upon.
But don't you think, I don't know, I think, you know, if you compare Michael Bay and like James Cameron, they're quite similar in their like they make very popular kind of popcorn movies. But there is a definite like difference in quality. Like if Michael Bay had made Titanic, like it wouldn't be the movie that it is.
But sure.
And a lot of people look down on Titanic, and when I was a snobby teenager, I probably would as well. But like there is art and craft in that film. And,
even I don't like Titanic that much anymore. My tastes have drifted since then. So I'm not like standing up for it. Yeah. But so here's my rebuttal to that is that I'm sure there are some Michael Bay fans who hate Avatar. Avatar is this very big commercial film, but meaning that it's just a different taste. Like there are people who are into like cars and they just like movies about cars going fast, and it's as simple as that. But it has to be well done for that, whatever that is, and that they're not into the kinds of themes that James Cameron is into because he's got his own political thing going on.
Maybe.
But please, yeah.
I don't know. I think good taste exists, but you're not a bad person if you don't have it. I don't know. I think as you get older, your taste change. Like
yeah.
I don't know.
But okay. Say like some of the anime that you're into, I'm sure there must be some literature professor somewhere who would look down on that anime as lowbrow. And surely you would defend the anime to those people, no? Or
well, that's just because they don't know anything about it.
Okay, right. Good.
Yeah, like maybe if I were to be on set in a Michael Bay, and it's not like I don't respect Michael Bay as a filmmaker. He makes a lot of money and gives thousands of people jobs, and I'm sure there is some artistic merit to it. And I'm just thinking of the worst, like, what's The Rock? I used to like The Rock. If I watched it again now, I'd probably appreciate the cheesiness of it. But something like, Transformers,
a better
kind
example,
of artless, I think.
Yeah, a better example, I think, is The Room, which you talked about before, right? You brought up.
I haven't seen The Room, but I know.
Yeah,
I know enough about it to.
I haven't seen it either. I've seen the film about it or whatever. Yeah.
Okay.
The Disaster Artist. Yeah. And so my point is that that's an easier case where quite clearly the filmmaker's intent, the filmmaker did not succeed at what they were intending to do. And that's quite an easy case where you can call it bad because you just check off what are they trying to do? Did they achieve it? No. Okay, bad. And but they achieve something else, which is it becomes this timeless thing that people make fun of for how bad it is.
Yeah.
But nobody watches it. That's a funny thing too. They just talk about it. Like,
yeah, I've never seen it. I don't really have any intent. I'll probably, I don't know if it's on Netflix or anything. Okay, let me have a look at my other questions. Let me see what I had. Do you think stories are good for us? Do you think stories are bad for us?
Wow, I love that question. Oh my god, because there's I have this Facebook group with my wife, and we do all these kinds of theory questions, philosophical questions about not just film but story in general. And one that I'm planning to do soon, but I'm trying to wrap my head around it myself, and so this will help me think it through with you. Oh, and this is the dialectic. This is like what Socrates was doing. Is that you can't think of it by yourself. You need to bounce it off somebody to really put it through the rigor of peer review. And so here's my answer, which is I don't know, and I'm scared that I don't know, and that I feel like I love stories, I love film, and I'm not into sport, for example. And my wife is into sport, and so when I was younger, I would sometimes look down on people who are into sport and say, "Oh, that's not important. Cinema is important. Sport's not important." But then as I get older and I take on this subjective theory, whatever, I'm like, wait a second. Myself as a movie fan, am I not just as, isn't my knowledge of movie trivia just as meaningless as somebody who memorizes baseball statistics? And I don't mean to put down people who memorize baseball statistics. I'm just saying that we are the same. Is that that's their passion? This is my passion.
Yeah.
And that so these bigger questions come out, like what's the purpose of any of this? And this is really fundamental stuff about like what's the purpose of life, et cetera. And I don't know. I'll keep thinking as we're talking. But what's your answer? Is it important? Is story important?
Well, I think the way people think is in stories, so it's kind of unavoidable.
Right.
But if you look at I think a lot of philosophies or religions, not the Judeo-Christian religions, but stuff like I guess Buddhism. I don't know so much about Hinduism. I think it's older than Buddhism, but I think Buddhism kind of branched off from it. I'm not so sure. And like Stoicism, those kind of philosophies are I think a lot of the things we can learn from that is like stories cause us pain if you're in the wrong story.
That's it.
And a lot of stuff about mindfulness is kind of trying to get away from the story of your own life and just experience the moment as it is. And but then like I think stories are useful if you can rewrite your own story and the way you think about your own life. A lot of people have stories about themselves which are limiting. Like a lot of people have victim mentalities, whether or not you are a victim or have been a victim in your life. I don't know if it's kind of self-limiting belief.
Right. Yep.
And then there are stories that are positive, like I used to be a lazy person, but now I work really hard, or I came from poverty and I or just a story that I am a happy person can be useful.
That's a kind of hero's journey story.
Yes.
Right there.
But I think some stories and a lot of stories in movies are probably not healthy for people, and a lot of Hollywood stories, especially like people often talk about Disney films as an introduction to romance in life, and it's and having unrealistic expectations for little girls to meet Prince Charming and be taken away. I think there's some merit to that.
God. Yeah. No, I think everything you're saying is so true, and it makes me think of so many different things. Okay, well, one thing is, I don't think I've ever mentioned this to you, is so I wrote this. I used to write a lot about politics in film, and I wrote this one academic article that was published, but this other one that was not. And the one that was not published for good reason, meaning it wasn't quite ready, but the hypothesis or the theory I'm still into, and I'm still exploring whatever, and try to condense it. I'll try to say it in 60 words or less, something like that. But it's basically this: is that my theory goes, something happened with the end of the Cold War, and that there was a shift in storytelling, in mainstream storytelling in Hollywood, from what I would label deontological storytelling, meaning black and white morality, to utilitarian storytelling, meaning Game of Thrones, Breaking Bad, The Sopranos, stuff like that, where everything's morally ambiguous. There are no good guys, no bad guys.
Like New Hollywood, kind of Scorsese and
I'm saying something after that, because I would argue that Scorsese, so take Taxi Driver, for instance. Taxi Driver, I would argue, is a very moral film. It's not taking De Niro's side. It's kind of looking down on De Niro. Whereas The Sopranos is taking, Gandolfini's side and it's saying like, hey, he's a killer and he's a bad guy, but he's kind of cute anyway, and so my argument goes that the lack of an other in the philosophical sense, the capital O other, a powerful other in the end of the Soviet Union, meant that it was not possible for the United States as a culture to believably portray themselves as the victim, and in a normal hero's journey story, the nemesis has to be more powerful than the protagonist. And so then there are a couple of ways to go about that. One way is early in the 2000s, the War on Terror was the TV show 24. And so then you just fake it, which is you pretend that Al-Qaeda is much more powerful than it is, and that it's infiltrated the CIA, et cetera. And I spoke to this guy from the Navy, not like a very political guy, but he was shocked by how people had an unrealistic image of what the terrorists they were fighting looked like, meaning that people believed they were much more powerful than they actually were. And that, I would argue, is necessary for that traditional storytelling. But then the other way you can go with it is Breaking Bad, where you just stop making judgment calls and stop saying this is the good guy, this is the bad guy, and just like, hey, things are complicated, and even The Wire, and hey, it's all a gray zone, and that's where we are now. Is that that there's a perhaps not conscious, but for various reasons, a change in the nature of stories, and that there is data, or there are data that indicate that these stories do change society. So, for instance, there's the Will and Grace effect, which is that gay marriage in the States was possibly made possible because of people being exposed to gay characters on TV. Or another one is the TV show 24. There's a correlation between its positive depiction of torture as a thing used by the good guy and people's opinions about torture, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's, again, hard to measure, but there are data to indicate that mainstream Hollywood culture does change public opinion. And that's maybe a source of a lot of the culture wars stuff that happens in the States today. So long story short, what I'm trying to say is that I agree with you. The story is very powerful, and maybe the science of storytelling guy, he talks about Homo fictus. I think that's the same guy. Like the idea that humans shouldn't be called Homo sapiens; they should be called Homo fictus, because story is so essential to our being.
Okay.
We're not as rational as we appear to be, and so I think both the left and the right in America understand the power of media and in terms of changing public opinion. So, for better or worse, without making a judgment call about which side's right, the point is, it seems clear to me that these things maybe can change society, and hence, to finally answer the question, story is important, or at least it's a tool. It's a tool, and that it can be used for good or evil, and you choose what your purpose is or something. I don't know. Is that all water?
Yeah, I think what you said about 24 and what was the other one? Will and Grace, was it?
Yeah.
It's hard, because causation and correlation,
that's right,
which
exactly.
is affecting
so hard
which.
to measure. Yeah.
But I think it's Andrew Breitbart, I think, said politics is downstream from culture.
Yeah.
So I think that's generally true. I think we are definitely more influenced by stories than anything else.
Yeah.
But it's like you said, we're in a stage now where I think you said
kind of
stories are more in it.
Yeah.
Morally ambiguous. But I think since 2016 with Trump and Brexit, I think
interesting.
I think that's kind of changed. That's gone back the other way. I think, especially a lot of the corporate media are very one-sided. I think that's always been the case, but I think it's and the narratives they choose are heroes and villains, and
yes,
it's very, very more so than probably more so than movies. I think movies and modern TV shows and movies, despite being a lot more woke in a lot of ways, definitely tell more nuanced stories than CNN or Fox News, which are very partisan. Yeah.
No, good point. Yeah, and I love the fact that you put them in the same general category of story, meaning that I for a while was watching I want to say NBC or CBS or something like that, their nightly news report online. And I was blown away by the quality of the storytelling. Like, forget the journalism, forget any measurement of facts or any politics or anything like that. I'm just talking in terms of storytelling techniques. I was just these people are amazing. They, at the end of a lot of TV news programs like that, they'll often have a puff piece at the end, something like a feel-good story.
Yeah.
Their feel-good stories on cue would make me cry each time. They were really well engineered stories, and the stuff that we talked about last time with those 6 elements, I could see them working in these little stories. And I don't say that those TV producers are news producers or conscious of which techniques they're using. They're just, I'm sure they have so much experience that they know what kinds of stories feel right. And so I'm being a little more analytical and trying to analyze what they're doing, perhaps subconsciously. But anyway, I totally agree that CNN, whatever, that what appears to just be journalism is a story. It's a narrative. And
Yeah.
my father was a TV producer, and he used to
Yeah.
say, like, you'd get the image of a certain trend because you'd see a few stories in a row about car accidents, and you say, oh wow, car accidents are up. And actually the reason you get that feeling is because a producer somewhere has decided, yeah, this week we're going to focus on car accidents.
Yeah.
And the car accidents were always there, but it's the cherry picking problem. Is, do you focus on the car accidents, or do you focus on the other kind of accident or whatever? Yeah.
Yeah, a similar thing is, I guess, the war in Ukraine, obviously a horrible political event going on right now, but you don't hear about all the places being droned by
That's right.
the American administration, like,
Oh yeah.
and like civil wars being funded by the US. And
yeah, exactly. I totally agree. And I think that, again, without making it too political and coming down on either side, what I'm trying to say is that there's so much story going on there. Like Zelensky's people, you know, he's an actor, right? He's like Reagan.
Yeah.
These are really good storytellers, and I'm not saying that in a disparaging way. That you know, I'm sure, you know, just because it's a storyteller, it doesn't mean it's false or a lie or anything like that. But anyway, you need good PR, and Zelensky's been going around the world doing these speeches to different parliaments, whatever, and a lesser presenter possibly would have got a different result, meaning that yeah, I would contend. But like you said, it's always hard to measure because we don't have a control group, or we don't have a controlled experiment.
I think voter turnouts are like really low in Japan, right?
Mm-hmm. I don't know enough about it. Yeah,
I think a lot of people aren't really interested in politics.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Any idea why?
Yeah, I to be honest, like, I don't focus enough on Japanese politics. I should. I've been out of interest in that for a little while now, so I can't speak to it too much. But let me think. What's something useful I can say about Japanese politics? Is okay. Here's an interesting thing in terms of narratives. Is that so I used to do a class on, like I said, on politics and film, et cetera. So one topic that would often come up is like definitions. You know, to have any kind of debate, discussion, you need to be clear about terms. And so the ultimate controversial terms are left and right. What is left? What is right? Et cetera.
Yeah.
And I'd often hear from Japanese students at that time, and this is before all the chaos started in the world. So this is like 10 years back when things were relatively stable. And at that time, people were arguing that there was no left and right in Japan. And that opinion to me was so shocking, because to me it was quite clear that there were left and right in Japan. But the fact that they perceived it differently from the way I perceived it meant that some kind of different narrative was going on. And then the flip side of that, perhaps, is in the hyper polarized society in the States today, where it's almost tribal and red and blue is very visceral and everything. That too is the result of narrative in media, and both on the Fox side and the CNN side, telling people this is what right means, this is what left means.
Yeah, I think maybe part of that is people aren't so religious nowadays. So politics, or that kind of that tribal mentality, that desire is filled by politics in their life. Whereas Japanese culture, I think, has a lot more, it's not necessarily religious, but they have a lot more religious kind of rituals, and they have a lot more, I don't know if it's religious. But, you know, people go to shrines and they will honor their ancestors and do all this kind of cultural stuff. I think it seems like Japanese people seem to see themselves as Japanese. They're not so fragmented as America, especially.
Right. Yeah, and that, even that, I've recently been working on a story about national identity and stuff, and so that is a big interesting question to me, is like how national identities are formed, and even the very concept of what is being Japanese. Yeah.
And you said that was kind of invented by modern Japanese identity has been crafted.
Yeah, and I don't mean to pick on Japan and say that it's that Japan is in any way different from anywhere else. I'm saying that there were the same processes, is that the word, occurring all over the world at different times, and so like one example is that what I read in this one book called Imagine Communities by Benedict Anderson, I mentioned, and was that Spanish nobles from South America in the 16th century would go to Spain, like on business or something. And there were these really rich guys, but they were born in South America, like third generation or whatever they were, and or second or something at that time. And they were discriminated against by the Spanish back at the center of the empire. And the result of that was they said, okay, well, screw you guys. We're not Spanish. We're, I don't know, Argentinian or whatever we are, that they developed these new identities. And so my point being that there are historical factors that create these identities and that they haven't always been the same way. And that they change over time. So.
Yeah, I went to the Imperial War Museum in London the other day, and I was looking at the kind of wartime, not propaganda, but like posters like don't eat too much wheat, or like all the kind of British wartime attitude, like keep calm and carry on, all that stuff.
Yes.
Like
so iconic.
I think
and used so ironically today, which is funny.
It makes me think like how much of the British kind of national identity, the British character, has been, a result of like wartime propaganda.
Well, this guy Anderson, in his book, he does talk about Britain a bit, and he says, I think he was of British descent. I think he grew up in Asia or something, like a colonial kid, but he is very British culturally. And he was talking about England, his kind of cultural home, and saying how bizarre it was that 1066 was as big a deal as it was in English culture, because it is thought of as this kind of founding moment or origin moment, but it's actually this massive defeat and this tragedy where the French took over, and that so meaning that how, depending on how you spin the narrative, you could take the same set of facts and make it a tragedy or make it a heroic story. And the way it's taught in England is as a continuous narrative from then with William the Conqueror to Queen Elizabeth II. And so then that makes it a good thing. Whereas if you were to see it from the point of view of, I don't know, the Angles, or I don't know, Anglo-Saxons or whatever it was not such a good thing to have Normans come in and take over everything and change the language. Like now all the words that we use in English for anything slightly high class, like justice, or even food, like pork, beef, and poultry, these are French words. The English words are dirty words. They're low class words, but of course things change over time, and so that's the question: is what is English even? Like it's this mix of all these different languages. And this ties into maybe what we were talking about with Yuval Harari. To tie back into the story, is that this is what Harari talks about: is the idea that stories everywhere, and that stories in politics, like you were saying, and story is and Harari, like Anderson, is not trying to belittle it. He's not trying to say because it's a story it's fake or it's artificial or something. He's just trying to say that it's a tool, and that you can use it to unify people, and you can use it to achieve great things and structure societies, and but you should at least be conscious of the fact that things are malleable, that they don't have to be this way, that they could go in that direction or this direction, depending on how you choose, or to the degree that any individual is capable of choose to use the stories to engineer society.
I wanted to ask you if you ever read Lafcadio Hearn.
I have. I read a bit of his. Like I read bizarrest book. I read that's a word. Most bizarre book about dragonflies. He had like this book
Okay.
of like a collection of dragonfly stories. Oh yeah, because he was into Japanese mythology and like old stuff. And a lot of Japanese people didn't know these things. So he went around collecting all these stories. And that's another interesting thing. Yeah, the same time period is like how all these old Japanese stories were disappearing as Meiji culture was unifying Japan, and the regional stories were disappearing. And so Hearn was going around trying to collect these old stories and write them down so that they didn't disappear. So yeah.
Okay. And I think he's famous for a collection of ghost stories.
Oh, yes, right.
But I picked up his complete works for like 1.99 on Amazon or something. And like the first thing he wrote is his account of like entering Japan for the first time.
Okay.
And this was, do you know when he wrote? Was it the end or the beginning of the 19th century, I think?
I want to say like the end of the 19th century.
Yeah. And like his description of Japan is so, I don't know. He's so like he describes the Japanese people as like elvish.
Interesting, right?
And like everyone's wearing like blue clothes, and like he seems to be thinking everything's so magical, and like he talks about because like the beauty of kanji, like kanji, the Japanese characters are everywhere, and that makes such a difference on the way he perceives the world. And whenever he sees Western like Romanized text, he says it's like it just brings it down, and like it's so ugly. And like
yeah. I'm so with him there. Like I love jogging, and wow, when I was jogging the other day, I was looking at some Japanese writing, and I can read a lot of Japanese writing, but not all of it. And I feel like there's this concept in semiotics or whatever called sign and signifier, and about the artificiality of And so the point being that if I was living in Australia, I might be more easily brainwashed by all the English signs into thinking that they were real things. Whereas because I'm not capable, I don't read enough Japanese, I can become more conscious of the fact that this is not actually anything at all. It's a piece of plastic with a bunch of squiggly lines on it. And the only thing that gives it meaning is some collective agreement. And that's not to disparage it. The same can be said about English or any language. And so the point being simply that when you're within your own language, within your own culture, you can't see the forest for the trees. And my benefit as a writer and living in Japan and stuff is always to sort of be an outsider and try to like take a step back and see what's actually going on in terms of reality.
I think being an outsider is a really good way to experience Japan. Yeah, you don't have any of the, from what I can tell, the things people don't like about Japanese culture is like just the amount of pressure, societal pressure.
Yes.
Especially for women.
Yeah.
And I guess men as well. Men suicide rates are pretty high.
Right.
In Japan.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't know the sex differences, but men commit suicide more than women. But being an outsider in Japan, you don't really have those societal expectations on you. I don't know.
Yeah, and I might have said this to you before, but I feel I feel a close affinity to English because as a writer, writing in English and learning about English continuously, but still, my national identity is all mixed up because I have an Australian passport, grew up in Canada, lived in the States, lived in Japan, and my accent's all over the place. And so the benefit of that is that when I go to the States, Americans treat me as a foreigner. When I go to Australia, Australians treat me as a foreigner, and I'm a foreigner here. So I'm a foreigner everywhere, and that gives me a degree of objectivity where I can sort of like step back.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I've been living in London recently, and I've been really. I didn't want to come here, and so like I've had the attitude of the last 3 months living here of like I don't want to be here. But when I moved here when I was 26 as well, I think, something like that. And I was really excited to come here. And it's just so interesting how our own, internal beliefs about somewhere can change how we experience a place.
Yeah. Oh, that's right.
It's stupid, really. Like if I came from North Korea and moved to London, I'd probably be very happy with my life. Or at least happy with my environment.
You're in London now, right?
I'm in London now. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. No, that's the point. Is the grass is always greener, etc. Like
Yeah.
I idolize England a lot, and been there several times, and once on a film thing. And I was talking to a producer recently about England, actually, and I was saying that if I could live anywhere, there are a few, like a short list of places, and one of them would be England, and just because of my cultural affinity to the history
Yeah.
stuff. But he and I agreed that England is a really good place if you're really rich, and if
Yeah.
you're not very rich, it's not such a great place. Like,
Oh man, yeah. Trying to see a doctor is a nightmare. Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good point, especially London. Yeah.
Mhm.
I want to ask you a
Yeah,
few quick fire
please.
questions before we finish.
Yeah.
And if you have any questions for me, that's fine too.
Yeah.
Okay. Can anyone write a screenplay?
Wow, great question. Yeah, I would say yes, depending on, with the caveat that you would first have to identify your purpose. Like, I think one problem is that the industry has changed so much since the 90s, which is when the screenwriting classes proliferated. And the dream at that time was everybody wanted to be Shane Black and make $1 million for a spec script.
Yeah.
And that doesn't really happen anymore, and that it's kind of more likely that you'll get struck by lightning than that'll happen. And so for a lot of people, like myself at least, if you're thinking of it in terms of like money and work and stuff, it ends up mostly being working on other people's stuff, not working on your own ideas.
Yeah.
And as you know, and so then I would just say that yes, anybody can write a screenplay, but just be realistic about your goals. Like, and so I would warn people away from assuming that they're going to have somebody want to pay them a lot of money to buy their screenplay, as opposed to maybe write something short and make it yourself, and don't be trying to make money out of it. Just do it because you're into the story and it's something fulfilling for you or whatever. So as long
That's
as
what I did.
goals
Yeah.
are realistic. Yeah.
I think with YouTube as well, like there's so many different ways to make films nowadays. Do you know Internet Historian?
It sounds familiar. Yeah.
He does like documentaries, but like the way he animates it is so he just gets images online and makes kind of puppets from them and like makes an animation out of it. But it's he's a great filmmaker. And I think YouTube is a great
I love it.
It's just opened up filmmaking for so many people.
That's right.
Okay. You wrote an article I wanted to ask you about how to motivate yourself to write. Yeah.
Oh, just talk about that.
Yeah, can you explain that?
So as far as I remember, the gist of that article, what I was saying was that I was often asked in classes something to that effect. How do you motivate yourself? And I always hesitated to teach it as part of the class. And the reason I did that, because I still am always pursuing this kind of theory of everything, like a set of principles that I contend apply to every possible case, and therefore I'm not missing something. And then that's why I'll leave out something like the idea of the promise of the premise, which I think is an extra tool that you can use, but doesn't have to be in there, etc. And so likewise, I hesitate to teach people how to motivate themselves or how to actually go about the process of writing, because there's so many different ways to do it. And having learned about many famous writers, I was unable to see almost any pattern at all in their processes. And the point was that there was a pattern in the result, meaning that this person's story and this person's story would have the same beats, but how they got there was completely different. And so then that led me to think that probably there's no right way to go about it. There's possibly a right way to end up, but how you get there is up to you. And so I, in that article, outline a few common sort of techniques used by famous writers. Not, I'm not famous, but so I'm learning from them and summarizing their ideas for other people.
Yeah.
And but in short, I'll tell you for myself, and also this kind of generalizes a bit, is guilt is a big one. Meaning that that there's a workaholic thing or something where just you feel time clicking away, getting older, etc. And so just that if you can somehow use guilt to motivate yourself, that's a
Okay.
very, very efficient tool. I don't necessarily say it's the only way, but
I used an app called Stick, where you set yourself a goal, and if you don't achieve the goal, then you have to pay a certain amount of money. So that's a good one. Yeah. I use that for one of my books. Yeah. I think that's a good one. Did you have any more?
Yeah, well, okay. So in that article, I was breaking down like the difference between like a page goal per day versus a time goal of a certain number of hours, regardless of how many pages you do within that time. Or also question like setting yourself a deadline. And so again, like I said, that there's so many different ways that different writers go about it, but I'll just talk about my own personal experience and emphasize that this doesn't generalize, but is on the script I've just been working on today. Today was the last day that I've been working on it, and now I have to proofread it and stuff and send it. And so I had to write. Basically, I had a document that was 10 pages, and I had to translate that into a document that was roughly 30 to 35 pages. And so then what I did was just a very mechanical, mathematical process where I just took those 10 odd pages and said, okay, per day, I'm going to translate 2 of those pages into 3 to 4 pages of this new document. And so then I just, by setting it out mathematically, then I can predict when it will be finished by. And so that keeps me, and then I treat it like a religious thing where no matter how stressed I am, how tired I am, I have to meet that quota each day. And that's another rule that I've heard from some famous writers that, again, I don't mean to preach it because it seems like there are other patterns, but one common pattern is to be very, very wary of breaking your rhythm. That you, whatever rhythm it is that you decide on, set it and then just follow it. And as soon as you break it, it's so dangerous because the chance that you'll go back to it is so small. And so you need to use whatever motivating techniques to keep you on the rhythm, and that the rhythm guarantees that you'll get to the finish line.
That's like the Jerry Seinfeld calendar thing. Do you know about that?
Okay, no, how does it work?
He just has a calendar, and every day he writes jokes. He just puts a cross on that day, and then just don't break the chain.
Right. Yeah. That's it.
I find like with hacks, tips, all these kind of things, like they're good for a while when you get into it, but then I don't know, after a while it just comes down to, I think what's the word? Momentum is so important. If you've got momentum behind you. And
I'll get I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, like if you've got inertia, it's so hard to start. Like I got 90% through a novel, and I think it was about a year ago I got that far, and I haven't done any work on it since, on like the first draft of a novel. It's just that inertia is so hard to get over. It's getting that momentum behind you, maybe like making it as fun and easy as possible. Like just like 100 words a day.
No, fun is a very important point too, like for me at least. And again, I don't mean to generalize, but I make sure I get all of my busy work out of the way, so I have nothing stressing me out, and then I just sort of sit and kind of relax and have fun. And I like a beer. I drink alcohol, so I will have a beer and just kind of relax, and then I'll write a little bit, and then play a bit of a computer game, and then I get guilty. I start to feel guilty while I'm playing the computer game, and then I use that guilt to get back to the writing, and then I feel good about myself, and then I have another beer, and it's just up and down, whatever.
Okay.
But that's for me,
That sounds like a nice way to do it.
And the alcohol also helps because it loosens the inhibitions, it overcomes the perfectionism that but what was I going to say? Oh God, there was something you said that it'll come back to me, but I think there are so many ways to go about it. And
do you remember the movie Trumbo?
Yes, I've seen.
I remember when that came out.
I
was at university, and I had a typewriter in my room, and I remember like being inspired. I was writing a Simpsons spec script at the time on my typewriter. I remember like sitting there with a cigarette and a glass of whiskey and a typewriter. Like
that's amazing. I'm jealous. I've never used a typewriter.
I think I was into Mad Men at the time as well. So
very cool.
if you can get yourself into that frame of mind where you make it more fun, or
Yes.
Yeah, typewriter is really great. It's very kinetic. It feels good, like having that physicality about it. I definitely recommend it to any writer, because it's quicker than writing by hand as well.
Right.
I find when I write by hand, I keep a journal, and I find if I write by hand, it's much better. It's much more, because it takes, if you have a thought, it's so easy to type out any old crap. But if you've got to write it by hand, it requires that little bit extra effort. So you have to, I find my writing is much better if I do it by hand.
Yeah, but I'll get really real with you for a second here, and say something that's sort of like, off the script, which is, and something that I tend not to say to students, but I'm saying it in this video if it indeed ends up in the cut, but I'm happy for it too, because we're speaking honestly. Is when people ask me how to motivate yourself to whatever, I have always struggled with the question, because motivating myself to write is the one thing I've never had problems with. The problem is the quality. Like I've always been writing, just that I was writing crap, or slightly less worse, less bad crap. And so my point being that I feel like I don't know, with mountain climbing, the cliche is, why did you climb the mountain? It was there. So I honestly just love writing and have no choice. That is just something I'm into. And so I would say ultimately that's kind of like, it's really harsh to say to beginners a lot of the time, but is to not, you're not a beginner, but I'm saying to students, is like, are you really into this? Meaning that it's no fun. It's a lot of stress. It's a lot of hard work. And that's it. I said this in an interview, a print interview I did, which is, I learned this from Scorsese, from the ad for his master class. And he was saying something to the effect of, like, the only reason you should be a director, in his case, he was giving advice about being a director, is if you have no other choice. Like that is just within you. It's this energy that has to come out. And that's how I feel.
Yeah, there's definitely something to be said for that. I think talent is the ability to enjoy practicing something. Like I made 2 friends at uni who are fantastic, 3 friends who are amazing concept artists. So they do paintings for video games and character design and all that stuff. And I realized that they're so good at what they do because they do it all the time. They just love, like my friend Joe, he'd wake up at, I think, 8 in the evening or some ridiculous time. I don't know, 4 p.m. something ridiculous, and just paint all night. When everyone else was asleep, he'd just be painting all night. And he's so talented because he enjoys doing it. I think writing is different in that it requires a lot of cognitive load. It's okay. I don't think anyone can write at high quality for like more than 3 hours a day. I don't know.
Yes. Right.
You're writing creatively. I remember, I think one day I remember writing 2,000 words or 3,000 words and being very proud of that achievement. But it's very difficult to write a lot, as opposed to drawing, where it's you could probably, I mean, I don't know, I'm not an artist, but you could probably do something like that for, most people can do a lot work at a high level for a few hours a day, but writing is a little bit more intense focus, I think.
I think you mentioned Murakami before, and so I heard something about his method, which is that he would work for a very short amount of time each morning and spend the rest of the day like just window shopping or something. And to me, that's an idyllic lifestyle. Like, so I don't have the money to go out shopping and everything, so my cheaper version, not being a big shot like him, is that I will write for a relatively short amount of time in the morning and then spend the rest of the day relaxing and building up guilt to carry me through the next day, and establishing a rhythm where I can predict that within a certain number of days I'll be finished. And then also, if given a choice, I would much prefer to do 2 pages per day of a screenplay than 4 or 5, or the maximum I can do is like 7 or something on a sustainable basis.
Yeah.
So that's the key thing, is the sustainability, meaning that, yeah, sure, I can do maybe 20 pages in one day, but am I going to want to do it at all the next day? Probably not. Yeah. So.
I find if I'm writing dialogue, I can write a hell of a lot. I find writing dialogue is
right,
because sometimes there's no consequences to the rest of the story, so you don't have to think.
right.
If it's just people chatting, which I like writing, I don't know if it's that enjoyable for the audience, but yeah,
Tarantino style. Yeah.
It's a lot more enjoyable for me. Yeah, I think, I don't know. It's weird with writing. It's one of the only things where there's a lot of discussion about how to stay motivated. I mean, no one talks about stay motivated to, get good at Fortnite, or
yes,
do you know what I mean, or be a good artist, or I think no, probably drawing there is a little bit of that, but it is one of the rare fields where there is a lot of discussion about how to stay motivated to do it.
Yeah, well, here's another kind of, for me, scary, profound question that I'm planning to address in that group that I'll throw at you is, so thinking that anyone would want to read what one writes strikes me as a slightly crazy, egotistical state of mind, and that is the state of mind of a writer. And so I don't know, like, I guess my question is, isn't wanting to be a writer fundamentally a kind of weird, snobby thing in some way or something?
I feel like I don't know. I feel like I heard Russell Brand saying, like, he was quoting someone else, and I can't remember who it was, but he said, like, if I think something is interesting enough to write, then why wouldn't other people be interested enough? You know, well, I'm like anyone else. If I'm interested in something, somebody else is going to be interested in it too.
Yeah.
And I think for me, it's not an ego. Or maybe it's an ego thing. I'm not introspected enough to really understand all of my motivations. You know, I'm not a robot, I guess. I don't know, but for me, it's just something I feel like I have to say, or it's just super interesting to me.
That's right.
And if I think someone's already said something or said something better, then I usually don't say it.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. What, like, this is obviously not a criticism of any writers or anything, as much as just a question about, like, what is at the core of this desire? Like, so my fear is that it's connected to social media stuff, like, where everybody feels a need to present themselves in social media to the world, and that we're being perhaps indoctrinated into thinking that we all are snowflakes who are important and need to be valued by others, or something like that, or I don't know. And that what am I trying to say is that okay, there's this Italian philosopher, Gramsci, and his idea was that each human is a philosopher. And so, you know, there are the two sides of the coin. You could say that people posting on Facebook, like I do, talking about their opinions about something, it's like very solipsistic or something. But on the other hand, the democratizing nature of something like Facebook is that everybody can do it, and that everybody is a pundit or a philosopher or whatever. And I don't know. So I struggle with these concepts of, like, how do you judge quality, like we were talking about, and I was talking to a quite established comic book writer, and he was saying, like, you know, these questions of, like, is being famous important, and if so, why? Like, why is it important to be famous? And is being paid for your writing important? And if so, why? And that it seems to be connected to some kind of unspoken deep insecurity within the writer themselves. I
don't know. I think some people are naturally drawn to it's just personality types. I mean, if you look at I know. I think yeah, just personality types. I think some people are not naturally like explaining things, like teaching.
Yes.
I think I like explaining concepts to people. Sometimes I feel like a physical rush when I know I'm explaining a concept to someone who doesn't know anything. I feel it physically, but yeah, I think some people I don't know if I'm a natural storyteller. I don't think I'm a particularly good storyteller verbally. It's not like
you are wonderful, yeah, with your videos, at least what I've seen. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
but, you know, some people are in a public situation are able to, you know, spin a yarn.
Oh yeah, but there are different kinds of different
yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't think I'm like that, but yeah, some people are just naturally drawn to telling stories. I don't know if it's an ego thing, and I don't know if it necessarily matters if it is an ego thing.
And I think the Science of Storytelling book touches on this question, which is like about the social function of gossip within tribes and primitive societies or whatever. Is that we think of gossip as a bad thing and people talking behind people's backs, but actually it has this social regulating function or something, and that perhaps the origin of all storytelling is people within the tribe gossiping about each other and talking about the good and bad points and discerning moral lessons from their behavior and stuff. And that would, if true, lead to me thinking that it's not the purview alone of writers put on a pedestal, but something that everybody does to various degrees. And
yeah, I think everyone is a storyteller. I mean, everyone has their own ideas about their own life is as a story, right?
That's it. Yeah.
And to go back about what we were saying, like
please,
about motivation, I think it's stuff like writing and working out is something that feels great once you've done it.
Yes.
But it's something we don't want to do, or it's difficult to start doing.
The other flip side of that, I was talking to my mother about this because she just wrote this book and she's been working on it for a long time. And I was warning her because she was just about to finish it. It's like, get ready, because then you've lived with it so long that your daily life has been about this monster that you've been creating. And then once you don't have it anymore, it's like, I don't have a purpose. And you need to quickly find something else or you'll sink into depression. So, at least for myself.
Yeah, I never experienced that, but I always had another screenplay to work on next. Yeah. Okay. I guess our next question: why is screenwriting so hard? But I think we've kind of we kind of covered that. I think. So I think we're about done. It's been almost 2 hours.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah. No, thank you for all the time. God.
Okay. No worries.
Yeah. And I really, honestly, you know, you can put this in the show or not, but I'll just on a personal note say that I really appreciate like the going deeper and deeper and deeper, like meaning I do these YouTube videos with this friend of mine and that's kind of like almost promotional stuff and it's honest to God not scripted, but nonetheless I'm storytelling, I'm presenting something, and you know there's a degree of like sales, you know, subconscious, but here I swear to God I was just kind of forgetting that it's being recorded, and I was really interested in what we were talking about and getting as deep as I can and getting as honest as I can. And I think that's a tribute to you as an interviewer, that you're, you know, disarming. So I hope I don't look too crazy in the final part.
Well, you know, today we talked a lot about, you know, psychological and philosophical stuff, which I read a lot about. I don't read so much screenwriting stuff anymore. So I think, you know, in the future we can have conversations about more philosophical stuff, and you seem to know what you're talking about there a lot more than me. Yeah, cool. All right, I'm gonna stop the recording. So thank you, Matthew.
Thank you, sir.
Is there anything you want to plug?
Oh, I see. Yeah, so okay, plug. Yeah, so maybe a link to the Facebook group that I talk on. So if that could go somewhere, that'd be awesome.
Cool. All right. Thank you, Matthew. See you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.